it's time to figure out how to make some adjustments in the cane. Now, I wanted to stop for a second, and if you're confused a little bit after the last video about adjusting the wires, about like why do I want to open the tip or why do I want to squeeze the wires to do anything to this reed, then you need to make sure you find the chart that's in the workbook to give you a sense of what that's actually doing to the reed. What I'm doing in these videos is demonstrating the skill that you need to actually make the adjustments. So the first one was which direction to squeeze the wires and what that looks like with a mandrel and some pliers. And in this video, I'm going to use just a few more tools, and I'm just going to show you what I generally do as a basic adjustment for like a new factory reed. There's a lot more to know, and so I've researched a lot of that information for you, and that's also in the workbook, or it's in the reed adjustment effects document. So try to get your hands on one of those written documents to study what you actually need to do to fix various problems with a reed. So now that we're demonstrating the skill of adjusting the cane, we want to make sure that we remember a basic rule about reed adjusting, which is always test your adjustments after each time you do something to see if it's worked. So with wires, that means you bend one and then you play on it to see how it works. If you bend both wires at once and then try it, you've probably made quite a dramatic adjustment. So little adjustments followed by a good test of seeing if it fixed your problem is the way to adjust. Remember that you need to have an idea of what problem you're trying to fix before you start adjusting the reed. Otherwise, you'll just be doing a whole lot of adjusting, and especially with this version where we're taking off a little bit of cane, you may just end up in a pile of cane shavings. So let's figure this out. You're going to need a few more tools this time, but it uses the mandrel and pliers from Okay, let's figure this out. So we're going to adjust the cane, and you're going to need a few more tools than you did for the wires. Now, we're still going to use the pliers and the mandrel. So the mandrel is where we're going to put our reed while we're working on it to give it some support and to make sure that our whole hand can control the orientation of the reed. And the pliers are still available in case we... So we're going to figure out how to make these adjustments in the cane. But you should know there are really, really handy reed adjusting kits for a reasonable price. I mean, it's close to $100 as of right now, but you get everything that you need to make basic adjustments to the reed. You get pliers, which don't have to be any particular type of pliers, but you get some in a reed adjusting kit. You get a mandrel of some kind for supporting the reed and being able to control it with your hand. You would also get a plaque. Now, a lot of reed kits come with a black sort of rubbery or plastic molded plaque. The one I'm using right now is a larger piece of metal which also serves as a flat cutting surface. And that's another thing that might come in a reed adjusting kit is an actual cutting block that allows you to press down with the blade of a knife and trim off a little bit of the tip of a reed. Okay? So I'm using this as a plaque right now, and a plaque is something that goes between the blades of the reed and gives them a little extra strength so that if you're using a knife, you can actually make very fine adjustments without that reed bending out of your way. So the last piece here for a reed adjusting kit is going to be a knife of some kind. Now, you've probably heard about really expensive reed knives, and I'm sure that they have their uses, and if you're really good at making bassoon reeds, I'm sure they're really, really good and helpful. But if you don't have one yet because your reed adjusting kit hasn't arrived, generally that comes with a basic reed knife. But if you're just using what you have, a basic utility knife will work. This happens to be a Stanley locking blade utility knife, which means I have to open it up and then move the blade out. Okay, so it's not retractable, but because it's locked, it's going to give me a lot of control. And this is really pretty sharp for the job that we're going to do. It would be pretty easy to just lop off a portion of our cane. So if you're using one of these, I suggest the locking blade type, just because you'll have a real, that blade won't move anywhere you're not expecting. Okay? So let's check this out. Now, I've adjusted the lighting again so that we'll be able to look through this reed. My first step is going to be to look at it up to a light and see what is going on with the thickness of the blades. I want to see whether I have a nice round-shaped heart and lighter corners. So as I take a look at this guy, I can see I do already have the basic shape that I'm looking for. And as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of finger-shaped. So I can sort of put my finger there to cover the dark portion. And what you see is mainly the bright corners. And those are the areas that you're going to end up aiming for as you shave the reed. Kind of hard to get my finger on there the right way. But what we're really looking at are those lighter areas. And in this case, based on the shape that I'm seeing and the heart that I can see at the top of the reed, I don't think I would do a whole lot of work unless the reed was having a specific problem. But I'm going to go to my new reed that I just opened up and just tried out today. Okay, so this is my new reed that I just opened up. And I'm going to look at it from with a light behind it to see whether I have the correct shape or not. So what I'd be looking for is that nice round curve at the very top to give me a clear, defined heart. And that would be right up above that darker spine, which is a little bit lower down the reed. And then I turn it around, and I see something very similar. And what I'm seeing here is that the tip and the very, very corners are pretty bright, but the center is all kind of one color. And in this case, I think what that means is I've got too much cane in those corners. On the other reed, you saw that there was quite a bit of light down those sides. So in these areas, the corners here and down these sides, I'd like to see a little bit more light coming through, which means I need to figure out how to make those a little bit thinner. That's where our reed knife and reed adjusting kit comes in. Let me turn the light back on. This is my reed, and I know that I'm planning to adjust these corners and some of the space down here. And the shape that I'm looking for is sort of a finger. My finger has a nice round curve to it. So if I use that as sort of my guide, or even my thumb, then I can see what areas I'm aiming for. My thumb, I think, is a little bit too big to be helpful. But some people have a thumb that gives them a great guide to the shape of the heart that they're looking for. So I'm going to be working on the corners a little bit and maybe just a little bit trying to round that tip so a little bit more light comes through. Obviously, if I want a little bit more light to come through, I'm going to need to shave some of the cane. I'm going to dip it in the water once more because keeping it soaked is a big deal, not only when we're adjusting the wires, but also when we're shaving the cane. So this plaque piece just gets placed between the two blades of the reed. Now, for this particular plaque, I'm going to go ahead and move it over so it's supporting the corner that I'm going to work on first. And then I take my knife, and with my thumb, on the reed, and I added my mandrel to the back, so I have a lot more space for my hand to be safe away from the knife. With my thumb covering the portion that I don't need to work on, I'm going to start shaving just a little bit of that reed. Now, if you have a big thumb like me, and depending on the shape of your knife, you'll have to adjust that a little bit, but it's good for visualizing what you're going for. Because since we're not looking at a light right now, it's hard to tell exactly how much cane I'm going to need to take off. So all I can do is give it a try, and then once I've balanced it and done the same thing on both sides of the reed, then I can hold it back up to the light and see my progress. Remember, you can never put cane back onto the reed. So it's a good idea, especially the first few times you try this, to take it easy. A way to do that is to pay attention to your knife and focus on moving in a horizontal direction. So if you start thinking vertical, like I'm pushing down toward the reed, you're pretty likely to carve in like you're whittling, and a corner of the reed will be gone. So horizontal motion that just shaves across that corner of the reed. So as I turn my blade, I'm eyeing out that corner that I want to work on. And I'm going to give us very slight horizontal motion. And I feel like I'm barely touching the reed, but you can see some cane has already come off on my real sharp knife. So I'm going to work on that corner a little bit more. And a lot of strokes take you out to the corner. You want to be working down the reed and down and out. So down the reed and sometimes down and out away from the spine. At the other side would be here, down and out away from the spine. That's the direction of all your adjustments, whether you're using a knife or even a small file, which does a very similar thing and just removes some of the cane. So, I've taken some cane off this corner. And I'm going to try to make the same adjustment in the other corner of the reed. I'll work on all four corners, and then we'll see what we've got. Now, before I'm totally finished here, I want to make a clarification about making a knife stroke. I'm still learning, but I would say you need to take your knife and make a long stroke that terminates at the corner of the reed. Unless you're adjusting the very, very straight tip and thinning that out a little bit, most of the time your strokes are aimed toward the corner. Now that presents a problem if you make a whole lot of strokes, because that's already a very skinny part of the reed. So just keep in mind, if you run out of corner, that corner is going to come off, and now you have a non-functioning reed. So again, be very careful, and once you've made an adjustment, test it out. But for balance, I needed to work on all four corners. So here's the reed I just spent some time working on, and we're going to look at it with a light behind it to see if we made any progress. All right, I can see a little bit more light coming through those corners, but I still have a ways to go to make sure that those corners are nice and bright so that I have a well-defined curvature to the heart. Here's the other side. They don't look totally identical, which means I may not have worked completely evenly. Now I have to start to make goals for myself for my next shaving. I look at the portions that are darker than I want them to be, and I know that that's an area that I'm going to work to shave down. The really light corners, I probably need to be careful not to overshave. Eventually, I can cut them off. The basic idea of adjusting your bassoon reed to get great balance is a two-directional taper. The obvious taper is visible in the rails. From back here, the reed gets thinner and thinner as it approaches the tip, and that's in thickness. But there's also a taper as we go from spine to corner. So as we go from spine to corner, that's also tapering down, which is why we end up with this area, that whole corner, being lighter. That combination of taper that comes down from the spine, down and out, and the taper that goes from the back to the front of the reed is what allows the reed to do its job of vibrating. So I'm trying to maintain that taper in my mind, thinking about the parts of the reed that I may be shaving, And then I want to always test my adjustments after I shave it. So let me give it a try. So a minute ago, when I tried this reed for the first time, I really could only get a high pitch. And now I'm hearing a little bit more freedom in the low frequencies. I'm going to flip it over. Already, I feel like I'm getting a better response from this reed in the low register. I was already getting plenty of high frequency initially, and that's because there was so much thickness to the reed when I caught it out of the box. So, those are a lot of the basics for how you would actually take a little bit of cane off the reed. The area that you adjust, well, there's a lot of areas you can adjust. And so there's a chart and a table that shows you some of the places on the reed you may need to remove some cane and what exactly that does to the response or the vibrancy of your reed. So be aware that you can't put cane back on, and knives really are sharp, so you just want to be real careful and have the appropriate tools when you're working on adjusting the cane. Good luck giving that a try.